Well, hello, everyone. We're all really happy to be here today at your American Makerspace in Qarshi. We're coming to you virtually from all different parts of the United States, and today we're going to present the second installment on digital drawing and painting. So, before we start, what is digital drawing and painting? I think here's a definition by Alvy Ray Smith, an early computer digital artist. I think that you have to think about tools. The computer is the tool that creates a traditional media called painting. And basically, it's a new tool and an old medium. So these are the artists that we'll be talking with today. You probably just saw them on the screen, or you probably see them now. We want to remind you that this is part of a series, and I think there are at least two more sessions. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. Um, and my name is Gregory Little, as Cynthia said. I'm not going to be presenting my work today, but I'm an artist, a teacher, and a theorist. I work with poetic imaging of science, and I use painting, drawing, digital painting, digital drawing, animation, virtual reality, kind of whatever I need to make my point. And we are all part of a group called Techspressionism. And Techspressionism is a relatively new term, and it was first used, to my knowledge, by one of today's artists, Colin Goldberg. And it is an artistic approach. I don't know that it's a movement, but it's an approach to technology, using technology to express emotion in visual art. And we're part of a tradition of expressionism. There was early expressionism, abstract expressionism, neo-expressionism, and now Techspressionism. And we're part of a large global network. We have monthly salons that include meetings like this, also virtual meetings. We have co-working sessions where artists come together and discuss ideas and encourage each other and give each other feedback. We organize international and national exhibitions of our work, and we have many, many interviews online. So the reason we came to Uzbekistan was because of this exhibition called Hello Uzbekistan, which was held at Camuz in Urgench, and it's what brought us all here. Only a small number of Techspressionist artists could be in the exhibition because, museum space and other issues. But we made a digital video to display, which is what you're seeing in your American Makerspace in Qarshi. The digital video screen was part of the exhibition in Urgench and Samarkand. The director of the museum, Shirin Tashova, who's pictured here on the left, was wonderful to work with. I encourage you to contact her. She was helpful in getting us started with making connections in Uzbekistan and helping with shipping details, arranging the exhibition in Samarkand, which you can see a shot of here. So if you ever go to Urgench, I'm sure she'd be happy to talk with you and show you the collection. Before we start today with presentations by three contemporary artists, I would like to acknowledge some of the early artistic developments in computer graphics. I want to go back and look at the pioneers. The pioneer is a person who was one of the first to explore a new area. And we owe a lot to those early pioneers from the 60s and 70s who brought us where we are. These were artists and researchers who had to basically build everything from scratch. This is Ivan Sutherland, as you can see, in 1963. There's no keyboard there, and there's no mouse there. There's a very crude monitor, but he is drawing on the screen in 1968 using an application that he developed and the hardware called Sketchpad. This is Douglas Engelbart, a research engineer. I spoke to him actually on the phone prior to his death. And he gave the mother of all demos in 1968, where he basically introduced modern computing. He built a mouse, he shared screens, there were hyperlinks, there was all sorts of stuff. Another one that fascinated me early on was this project by Eric Mueller. He is not an artist, but he thought, I wonder if I could get the computer to daydream, which fascinated me because it seemed to mean that if we could daydream and log the results of the daydream by the computer, we could use those results to do stuff, to create new worlds, surrealist imagery, whatever come to mind. But the fact that the computer could be an emotional tool, that sort of beige box on my desktop could be told to dream, fascinated me. So here's an example of some of his pseudocode. The idea here is that he is trying to get revenge on Harrison Ford because Harrison Ford refused to help him as a young actor. So he's revenging Harrison Ford. Another pioneer was Harold Cohen, who developed. He was a painter. He was a traditional abstract painter in London, and he decided he wanted to do this. So he created one of the first artificial intelligence programs called Aaron, and Aaron was a hardware-software combination, a robotic system that made paintings. On the right there, you can see the first little robot, which he called a turtle, which kind of moved around on the canvas and dropped lines. Another painter who started working with digital imagery was Vera Molnar. She's a French painter, and she decided early on that she wanted to learn Fortran and COBOL, which is a pretty arduous task. And these are some of the paintings that she created. Cynthia Beth Rubin, who's with us today, is an early pioneer. She was working in the mid to late 80s with Artronic, creating some of the first computer imaging projects. And Cynthia I owe a debt to because she is the person who got me hooked on this medium early on. Joseph Nekvatal is an artist whose work I first saw again in 1986, seemed to be a big year, at Brooke Alexander Gallery, I think it was in New York City. And he fascinated me because he was the first artist that I had seen who really took the underside of computing, the fear, the viruses, the cyberpunk nature and the information overload, and embedded that in his paintings. So that really interested me at the time. So my point, I guess, is that digital painting comes from many disciplines. It's rooted in research into human machine control. It's influenced by electrical engineering, mathematics. It is a research-based discipline, and it's shaped by computer science. So I would argue that digital painting or digital imaging in general, digital art in general, has as much a debt to these areas of research as it does to art history or the history of painting. So around 1990, these computers appeared. So these were no longer dedicated paint systems. These were kind of general computers that were now powerful enough to run commercially available digital painting software. Although I do recall that it could take sometimes 30 minutes to rotate, 30 seconds, sorry, 30 seconds to rotate a simple selection or move an object across the screen. But these were commercially available. So I bring you to Colin Goldberg. Um, Colin, in his work, combines traditional painting very successfully with digital drawing and digital mixed media. He first arrived at the term and the concept Techspressionism in 2011. He founded the Techspressionist Artist Group about 6 years ago, and it has grown to over 350 artists across 45 countries with 85,000 Instagram tags. It's pretty amazing. Colin received a Pollock Krasner Foundation grant and a New York State, I don't know what that stands for, grant, and has a solar exhibition scheduled.
Absolutely art.
Thank you. Solo exhibition scheduled for summer of 2027 at the Cape Cod Museum of Art. So, Colin, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Greg.
Mhm.
So my name is Colin Goldberg, and I'm a Techspressionist. I coined the term Techspressionism in 2011 to describe my artwork, which explores the expressive potential of digital media. In this presentation, I'm going to share my journey from traditional drawing and painting to Techspressionism. So I started out with a love of drawing and painting since I was a kid. This is a colored pencil drawing that I did when I was a high school student. I studied the works of the Surrealists and adopted some of their ideas into my work. This is an acrylic painting called Sky People, which was also done in high school. We got our first family computer in the 1980s, a Commodore 64. I began to explore digital drawing for the first time. Back then, there was a tool called the light pen that allowed you to draw directly on a monitor or TV screen. Amazingly, this cost only $40 back in the 1980s. In college, I studied painting at Binghamton University in upstate New York under an abstract expressionist painter named Angelo Ippolito. He introduced me to abstraction and encouraged me to move to New York City after graduation to pursue a career as an artist. This is an oil painting from that time period. After graduating from college, I moved to New York City in 1994. As a freelance designer in ad agencies and media companies, I helped launch brands such as Popular Science Magazine, Snapple, and Merrill Lynch onto the web. Through this work, I learned how to code HTML, as well as tools such as Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, which I later incorporated into my artwork. I do all of my digital drawing in Adobe Illustrator using a Wacom tablet connected to a Macintosh laptop. In the late 90s, I began experimenting with abstract digital drawing for the first time. I called these works metagraphs. I made the drawings in Adobe Illustrator, which is a tool used to create vector graphics. Vector graphics represent the lines, forms, and colors in an image with math and code, instead of as a grid of pixels like a JPEG image. This allows the work to be scaled to any size and remain razor sharp. Vector art is usually used for commercial work, such as logos and illustrations. I decided I wanted to eventually produce my work at a large scale, so I adopted this format for that reason early on. Here are a few works from this series. This piece from my Metagraph series, entitled Kneeling Icon, was produced as a large-scale digital monoprint on vinyl, which was later purchased by the Hearst Corporation in 2023. Here it is installed in Hearst Tower in New York City. In 2021, I had animated the piece and minted it as an NFT. In 2022, I combined the physical artwork with the animation, turning it into my first augmented reality artwork. When viewed with an AR app called Artivive on a mobile device, the artwork animates directly on the gallery wall. I collected 23 of these works into my book Metagraphs, which was published in 2023 and was the first augmented reality book of abstract art on Amazon. When viewed with the Artivive app, the drawings appear to animate directly on the pages of the book. I also created an original soundscape for each of the 23-second animations. In 2005, I began experimenting with running painted surfaces through my inkjet printer for the first time. I printed digital drawings directly onto the painted surface and then painted back into them, repeating the process to develop compositions with multiple layers of print and paint. I hacked my printer, removing the roller wheels so they would not smudge the print on the thickly painted surfaces. Here are a few works on paper from this time period. To create the work, I paint on paper or canvas, photograph the painted surface, and import the photo into Adobe Illustrator. I then do a digital drawing superimposed on the image and print this directly onto the painted surface. After developing a body of works on paper using this technique, I went back to school, entering the MFA program in computer art at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. I began experimenting with running small canvases through my printer and stretching them up to create my first Techspressionist paintings. Greg Little, our moderator today, was one of my graduate advisors in this program. As a grad student, I took a class called Digital Mixed Media and learned about InkAid, which is a special primer that allows for high-quality inkjet prints on a variety of media, including acrylic and oil paint. In 2014, I was awarded a Paula Krasner Foundation grant, which I used to purchase an Epson 9800 large format printer. I still use this machine in my studio today. Here are a few paintings created over the last 5 years. I'll close with this piece called Nottingham, a recent painting approximately 3 by 5 feet in scale. Once there's paint involved, I no longer consider it digital art. I call it Techspressionism.
Thank you, Colin. That was excellent.
You're correct.
Okay, and now we'll move on to Cynthia DiDonato, an artist living in North Providence, Rhode Island. Providence, one of my favorite towns. Cynthia is a retired educator, excuse me, who taught English and art in high school, as well as technology in education to graduate students in college. She was initially a water media artist, earning signature status at Rhode Island Watercolor Society and the New England Watercolor Society. She began creating digital artworks in 2014. She is an interdisciplinary artist whose focus is abstract digital and analog art and moving image animations. She creates very personal artworks, envisioning seen landscapes and unseen mindscapes. That's curious. She creates her artwork on an iPad and with a MacBook, and she has exhibited, as you can see, internationally. So take it away, Cynthia. I think you're muted.
Good evening, Makerspace creatives. I'm delighted to be here on this panel with Colin, our founder, Cynthia Beth Rubin, who has been an early adopter, and with Greg Little, who has a long history in digital artwork. The first slide here depicts the beginnings of the digital video that you saw at the Erd-Ghent Museum. And I began with an image of a piece of wood that I warped in Procreate. You should know that in place of Procreate, you could use Krita, particularly on Windows machines, and it's free, very powerful. Next, I created this image that you saw in Effect and LumaFusion video editing on my iPad, and you can do the same with Photomosh or using DaVinci Resolve. Again, both free items. This, of course, rendered a video that is very, very different from the initial piece that I started with, obviously. Next, I moved the piece, the video, named it No Words, and I worked in Kino Glitch this time, which is a program that can be used on the iPad and iPhone. And you can substitute Photomosh, which is a Windows program, and hopefully get some interesting results. This is the final animation that was in the digital reel in Erd-Ghent. Next, I'd like to talk about my inspiration for the work that I do. I'm always looking for textures and interesting images as I walk around in this world. The first row shows you the digital still of a painted floor, or I should say paint spilled on a floor, which I brought into Procreate. And I created a number of layers where I manipulated that floor and added shadows to create depths. And again, you could use Krita for that, and named the piece No Rhyme or Reason on the extreme right. The second row shows you my work with physical art. Not only do I use photography, but I use physical art that I create. This is a print that I actually made with a jelly pad. And then I brought that into, excuse me, Procreate, and again created many layers in which I manipulated that initial print. Moving along, another way I create is using digital brushstrokes in Procreate and manipulating those brushstrokes in whatever way I want. And of course, as you can see, I arrived at the piece called Counterpoint on the right. Counterpoint is one of the latest pieces that I've made. Lastly, here's another video animation called Subterranean. And I thought I would include it. I don't know if it's running, but
Oh, I
Zoom
can run it.
doesn't behave sometimes. There it is. And I want you to know what quote I really love that I'd like to share with you. And it was written by John Lasseter, who's an American film director, previously the chief creative officer of Pixar Animation Studios, excuse me. And he said, the art challenges the technology, and the technology inspires the art. I would love for you to visit my website, follow me on Instagram. And if you too have an Instagram account and you decide to experiment with some of the softwares I mentioned, I would love to see what you produce. Thank you today for having me.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was great. I love the way you mention all the software and show your process. Really cool stuff. Okay, and our next artist is Cynthia Beth Rubin. And Cynthia, as I said, I've known since the early 80s. I guess I don't have a bio slide for you, Cynthia. Maybe I
Oh,
missed it. I think I missed it.
you missed it. It's okay because I
Go ahead,
spoke in the
explain.
earlier one. People know. Do you want me to just say a little bit about myself?
I do,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, okay. So my background is in painting. I studied painting both in undergraduate school and graduate school. So that's very important influence on my work. And I started working on computers, as Greg just mentioned, in the early 1980s. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as I go along in the presentation. And I've been very fortunate to have had my work shown in many locations around the world and mostly through associations. I encourage you to join groups. We have these groups called Isaiah and SIGGRAPH that we can tell you more about. And right now, in fact, I think there's an open call for digital art I just got today from SIGGRAPH, which is a international group, but mostly based in North America. So I can send that to people. That's been wonderful for me. And I was fortunate because I was early to get some of the early grants. So I usually put that on my resume, but many people here have gotten grants, and I think we're all award winning in one way or another. So when people tell me to introduce them as award winning, I'm like, if you've been doing it long enough and you enter enough things. So let's get going with the
Yeah.
work. Okay, so here's the piece that Greg just showed you, one of my very early pieces. This predates scanning, and it's important to know that in the beginning, when there was no scanning, everybody drew things by hand. Those of us who were software users drew things by hand. So there were the people who programmed their work, but I drew things by hand and I was still painting. And I wanted to put this in actually against the wall so that you can see it. This picture of it in my living room is actually right behind me as well. That the physicality, what it meant to make an actual object, as opposed to doing this is a very early piece before there was even the possibility of gradients. So colors were all flat in the very beginning. So the idea of moving to something that was no longer an object, and that made people question. This article on the left says in Italian, is it really art? So by 1991, I was able to scan some architectural forms very flat into the computer, and I was still drawing by hand. Here you see tulips drawn by hand, mixed with some basic forms. Really getting into digital painting in 2011. I had an artist residency in the French Pyrenees. Those are mountains on the border between France and Spain, but on the French side. And the city sponsored it, the city called Arles-sur-Tech. I thought they made up that name, Tech, but that's actually the name of the river. I went out and did drawing because one of the requirements of the residency was that I engage with something local. So I just went into the mountains and did these drawings with a Wacom tablet and a little computer. And then after I did the drawing, I photographed the space, the mountains. So I got to know the mountains by drawing them, and then I imposed the drawing on top of the photographs, or the photographs, I combined them. But usually people were doing the opposite. Here I went a step further and I actually inverted. I made the dark colors the light colors. I reversed it and put that on top of the image. And so I got something that really brought out the forms of the mountains and also made it feel like night, very dramatic. And it was a very interesting process to mix the two. So this is my current work. After the trip to Uzbekistan, I was really struck by the history of astronomy, the research in Samarkand, and thinking about different ways that people have represented the calendar and the moon, and then pomegranates, which of course were everywhere in October, but they also are a symbol of the new year in fertility and also New Year in many traditions. And so I've grabbed onto the pomegranates. I started using a calendar from a Hebrew calendar that was done in Germany in the 1600s. It's at the New York Public Library. So I've been able to look at it and then looked at the diagrams of what the scientists are doing today. And first I made this image, which worked for me, but it also seemed to be very much an illustration. So I started breaking it up. I printed it out. I cut the print. I actually drew on top of the prints, and then I did some drawing on paper. But in preparation for this talk, actually, I went back to drawing and in GIMP, which is software I didn't know, but which is available to you. So took a pomegranate to the public library where they have PC computers and GIMP and started drawing. And I did a lot of erasing also to make layers because layers are very important where you can have different colors and textures. And here you can see that I started combining different layers and I got different colors coming through and different textures. And if you use GIMP, you have to export. So I had a slide of that. Then I took my digital drawing and I put it on top of the photograph and I got this, which I personally really love. I feel like it combines the organic feeling of the pomegranate. I experimented with wildly different colors. This is a Photoshop image, but you can do this in GIMP. And erasing between them in order to get what I really wanted at the end and to shock myself into thinking differently. So here are just a couple color variations. Making it lighter turned out to work the best. And I put it back into the image that I was working on before that had the drawing and some of the symbolism, and up in the upper right is a graph. And then I started working further to integrate it and make it feel less like an illustration and more like a painting that you could move around in and really relate to different parts of it and have colors moving in and out of your attention area. This is a detail from that which may work on its own. I'm still working on this and thinking about it. And actually through Techspressionism, we have a group that gives me great feedback. So that's where I am now. It's been a pleasure talking with everybody.
Okay, so just a reminder, thank you, Cynthia. That was great to have such a long and wonderful history with this process. Yeah, so we have like two more sessions coming up. May 14th, collaboration between artists and scientists. Second, a revised or revision, I guess. And then a 3D digital sculpture and worlds. So if anyone has any questions, I'd love to have a discussion. So does anybody on the Makerspace end have any questions for us?
Greg, you may want to stop the share.
It's not at the moment. Okay.
Yeah, great.
Okay. So I guess I have a couple of questions. Cynthia, since you were just speaking, I was wondering, how is your process? This is interesting to me. How is your process in digital media different than the original painting process, the traditional painting process?
Great. Well, as we all know, traditional painting, especially for those of us who started with oil painting, so this is like ancient history. But with oil painting, there are some real constrictions. We used to talk about thin on thick. You could not put thick, you had to start with layers or the paint would crack. And very much involved with it being an object and process. So it was actually, ironically, more of a linear process than digital is. Digital can be, you can go in and out of it. You can go, back and forth doing all kinds of different things. And I do a lot of what Colin showed. So Colin may also want to jump in here of printing out, drawing on it, getting it back in, being able to photograph. So.
Yeah, Colin, do you want to address that?
Yeah, sure. I think that coming from a traditional drawing and painting background, and then in parallel, kind of experimenting with computers, eventually those two things crossed over. And I remember I was actually in my parents' garage. I had my printer set up in there, and I didn't want to get paint all over the room that the computers were in. And I thought, like, I wonder what would happen if I painted on something and ran it through the printer. And the first couple experiments, resulted in sort of smearing of the ink and everything else like that. And then I popped out the wheels, and then it worked. And a lot of what I ended up with was through the process of experimentation with different media. And I actually ended up starting with house paint, which was a latex-based paint that was sort of iridescent, and it allowed for a very sharp print because of the makeup, the latex nature of the paint, but also the iridescence is something that I couldn't achieve with an inkjet printer. So I think experimenting with materials is a lot of fun. And actually, you guys at the Makerspace, you really don't need to use any specialized materials like Inkade. Like, you could literally draw on a piece of printer paper, or even use watercolors on a piece of printer paper, and then run that through your inkjet and just see what happens, and that's kind of how I got involved doing that.
Does the Makerspace have laser cutters?
It is laser cutters.
Yeah.
They don't have inkjet printer. They have a printer that is a laser printer.
Laser printer. Yeah.
Which actually gives very good quality prints.
That probably could work too. Yeah.
Oh, you do have
Yeah, we have.
What is that? What are we looking at?
This is a laser cutter.
It's a laser cutter.
Terrific.
Great.
I've seen, I've done some work where I put layers of paint down on paper or cardboard or something like that, and then put it in the laser cutter and etched through the surface, revealing colors underneath. I mean, there's all kinds of drawing techniques you can use with the laser if you don't cut, but actually just sort of etch or burn into the surfaces. There's a lot you can do with that as well. And with laser printers, I've tiled images using 8.5 by 11-inch standard US size paper and made 8-foot images by tiling laser prints together. So there's a lot there. There's a lot you can think about.
The other thing I suggest with you could do with a laser printer is make stencils and then use traditional media to draw. But it would
Excellent.
right?
Yeah, laser cutter is an amazing tool. The laser. Um, Cynthia Di Donato, this is kind of probably a difficult question, but how do you keep growing as an artist? What helps you develop? What brings you to the studio the next day, so to speak?
Well, first of all, being part of the Techspressionist group really has helped me to grow. Seeing the work of other Techspressionist artists has been extremely meaningful. Uh, Consider also our co-working group, which really inspires me, and I think it's inspired others to go beyond where we are. In fact, we influence one another, which I think is
Mhm.
a real positive. So I think that helps me to grow. The other thing is learning and experimenting with softwares. For example, I'm getting more involved with moving image animation. So I've been learning Motion and Final Cut Pro to increase my skills and understanding of where I can go with this, and also developing other themes in my work
Mm.
is, I think, important. So all of those factors go into helping me to grow, and I hope to continue to grow. I think it's something I consider myself a um, continuing learner.
Mhm. Mhm.
Never stop
Excellent.
learning.
Excellent. I love that attitude. And I love the all the software that you were using. I mean, you just in the presentation today, there must have been 6, 7 software packages. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. One
Yeah.
of the things about
Really cool.
using an iPad is the number of apps that are available, and sometimes I'm in and out of 5 of them.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's helpful.
Alan, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, I want to ask Colin what role, if any, vector image production still plays in his work. It seems like he's moved more towards various kinds of raster graphics.
Hmm.
No, actually, I pretty much exclusively do my digital drawing in vector format, specifically in Adobe Illustrator. But there's also an open source alternative called Inkscape. So
Hmm.
those of you in the Makerspace, you might want to experiment with that. You might already be using it for creating images for the laser etcher, because I know that's used quite a bit for laser etching and also using a plotter. But for vector art, I mean, all of the drawings that I do that I print onto various media and even drawings for my animation, I start with vector art. And ultimately they end up becoming bitmaps to be displayed on the screen like
Right.
JPEG images, or even printing. There's a process called rasterizing where you put in the vector image into a bitmap program like GIMP or Photoshop, and it'll turn it into a grid of pixels at a specified resolution. But all of the work that I do now, I do in vector, and I like the fact that with vector art, you can zoom in indefinitely. So if you create something that has all of this intricate detail, but there's a certain little bit of it that you really like, you can zoom in indefinitely and it just stays sharp. Same thing if you want to blow something up to large scale. That was the initial reason that I started working with it. And it was actually a computer science graduate student at NYU that explained the difference between vector and bitmap graphics to me back in the 90s. And I thought, well, this makes total sense to print things large down the road. And at that point, there was no commercial large format printing that was, affordable at all. But I thought eventually there
Hmm.
would be. So yeah, it's a big part of my process.
But, oh, excuse me, but Colin, maybe this is what Alan is referring to, and I might be wrong, but I think, don't you actually use paint? Like, forget about vector or analog. Don't you actually, yeah, human painting? Don't you combine that with your vector? And maybe that's where he's thinking of the roster because it has such a um
Yeah, well, I
delicious, yeah,
mean, like
yeah.
physical media like paint, certainly
Hmm.
that's, a big part of my work. So, but the digital component is all vector-based digital drawing. And
But
then,
you mix them though. You mix them, don't you? A bit, yeah.
yeah, for
Yeah.
some of
But
the
wait,
work,
yeah.
the paintings and the works on paper, involve physical media, but like the metagraphs are straight digital. So some of the work that I do consider digital art, like things that are created wholly on the computer. And then especially work that's screen-based, like animation, for instance, I would consider that digital work, maybe Techspressionist in spirit, but there's a distinction there. And I think a big reason that I came up with this term Techspressionism is because the work that involves paint, I just couldn't really call it digital art. It didn't make sense to me, and I tried to come up with a term that actually embodied what I thought the work was, so that sort of fit.
So we have a very attentive listener in Qarshi. I'd love to know if you have any questions. Woman in
I think she's shaking her head no.
There's no question.
I just wanted to mention something with regard to Colin's mention of vector art. Procreate, which I use, is raster based. And of course, as Colin points out, with the vector, the larger you get, the sharper it still is. Whereas with raster base, it's made with pixels, square pixels that can get blurry when you enlarge it. So it's important with me to make sure to choose a high resolution when I start working in Procreate in order to be able to make it as large as I'd like.
So maybe we can give just a really quick explanation here. When you're doing vector, the computer is remembering lines, outlines. And when you're doing what we call raster, the computer is remembering a pattern of little boxes of color all over the screen. And so obviously for something that looks more like a painting, you want to have little boxes of color, but for something that's more like a drawing, when the computer just records the idea of outlines, you can blow it up, you can enlarge it without losing anything.
Or
So
a more technical explanation is the computer is in vector graphics constructing the entire image from equations.
right.
Whereas in rasters, it's a line of numbers in memory.
Right.
Right.
And
I think,
so,
I think it's interesting because yes, in vector, the formula for a circle or the formula for an arc or whatever is recalculated with a variable as it gets larger or smaller. Whereas in bitmap or in raster, you have a pixel grid that, like say it's 1920 by 1080. That means there are 1920 pixels across the width, and it's a grid. It's fixed, and each piece of each level of the pixel is stored on the hard drive. So when you try to resize something that's 1920 by 1080, that's up over 2 million pixels. Let's say you double its size to 4 million pixels. Where do the other 2 million pixels come from? They come from the ones you already have, right?
Yeah, you have to figure out how to create the pixels.
Yes, exactly.
Which is what I do with my patented software.
Hey, Greg, do you mind if I just quickly share my screen? I think I could do like a 1 minute demo of what that looks like. So
yeah, go for it.
So I launched. So I have Illustrator open here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
So say, like a lot of what I do is I start out with just kind of like gestural drawing, which is in the spirit of the abstract expressionist. So say I make a mark like that, and then I use these 3D tools in Adobe Illustrator that allow you to take that mark and rotate it in space. So one of the things that I use is this wireframe format that allows you to come up with these kind of technological looking images. And then I can take that image and manipulate it and expand it. So after that, I can also apply some different transformations in it. And this is where it gets really interesting with Adobe Illustrator. And let's see, like say I do this pucker and bloat filter. So that like kind of like makes it shoot, it squeezes the image. So with vector art, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in and zoom in so you can see that you can continue zooming and then you start getting these really kind of wild sections within this composition. And it's something that can be done, fairly rapidly, So if there's a part of it that I really like, I can then crop it out. Or actually, if I want to convert it into something that's printable, I could select it and then go in and actually like rasterize it. So yeah, like in here. So you could rasterize it and then select a certain resolution, and then you could see once it's rasterized, you could see the pixels. And that's something where if you were opening it up in Photoshop, eventually you'd zoom in and see these pixels. So that's kind of, my quick minute demo of vector versus raster. But you
I'd
could
like,
also use those tools like Inkscape to create vector
Yeah,
drawings.
perfect.
yeah, that's what I was going to talk about, Inkscape. Certainly for the Makerspace, it's a free program, open source, like GIMP. So, you can get that instead of dealing with Adobe Illustrator if you decided.
Yeah, and if you're careful with how you save files, you should be able to move back and forth between GIMP and Inkscape and then back again, right?
Yeah, with Inkscape, you would be saving it as an SVG file most
Right.
likely, which is an open source format
Standard
versus
vector
like a
graphics.
PDF or Illustrator format, and that's scalable vector graphics. And then you could, that's usually the format that you would use for like a laser etcher or like Plotter or something like that. And then if you wanted to bring it into GIMP, you would open that up and it would then rasterize it, and you could save it as a JPEG or a PNG file.
Mm-hmm. And actually a lot of 3D programs will import scalable vector graphics, and you can then do a lot of 3D transformations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. We talked about people using Blender, which is also
Mm-hmm.
open, and you can bring in the 2D drawing and play with making it more 3D also once you get it into Blender.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's great. The workarounds of going back and forth
Oh,
between
yes.
different pieces of software is really important. If you're using MS Paint, for example, I know a lot of people use Microsoft Paint, but it doesn't have all the color manipulations that Microsoft Photo has. But you can do something in Microsoft Paint, bring it into Microsoft Photo, and then go back out. So when we use more expensive programs that have everything in it in one piece of software, but many of us who started early on are used to the fact that you just have to move around and find the software that does what you want it to do.
Yeah, I always find myself frustrated because I'm in between changing my intentions because the software won't exactly do what I want it to, versus learning from the software versus finding a workaround, like you're saying. And there's this kind of mixed intentionality that occurs. It's interesting.
You can always go to writing your own,
Yeah, well, you could.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, you could. Yes.
you
That's what
could.
I do.
I'm a
Yeah,
terrible
but
programmer.
what I say is one life to live. You can decide that you want to. I mean, writing your own is wonderful and it inspires people, and you produce fabulous work, Alan, which people can see in the moving image um, program once we get that video online. But then you don't have time to go to the New York Public Library and photograph the books or go
It's
around.
it's a
You have to decide.
225-mile drive for me
No,
to go to the New
but
York
what
Public
I'm talking, what I mean is, it's not that just what I mean is that you have to choose where you put your energy, and some of us
Absolutely.
you put your energy into writing software, or you put your energy into researching historical artifacts, or you put your energy into reading philosophy, because a lot of people get inspiration from reading philosophy. So each of us has to make some choices about where we're going to put our energy. And what
Absolutely.
I love about Techspressionism is that much of the digital art world has moved into only honoring those people who write their own software, if I
Right.
can say that.
Right.
That's stupid.
The history has been written to primarily honor the people who wrote their own software instead of, or in addition to, I'm not saying it's an either or, but included, I believe, need to be some of the people who were really putting their time into how can I push this medium? I mean, Roz, who's on here as well, was, and she spoke in our earlier session on digital paint, was really somebody who took the tools that were designed for the commercial world and went, how can I make art out of these? And that was very brave. Yeah.
And even a lot of artists that are not at all recognized as digital artists. For instance, Frank Stella, who's, passed away recently, but a very accomplished contemporary artist, used digital tools in creating a lot of his compositions and sculptures, 3D modeling tools and things like that. And, almost nobody really thinks of him as using computers or digital art because he never made a point out of, talking about that. But I think it's interesting that a lot of people, and I would say the majority of contemporary sculptors at this point probably use 3D modeling tools in some fashion, but that wouldn't make them digital artists, at least in my definition.
Almost every serious photographer on the planet is using powerful digital tools to manipulate their photographs.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yep. Well, I mean, a lot of, as you mentioned, the sculptors, Colin, a lot of sculptors hire someone to do the digital
True.
work. So there's a whole industry like that as well, right?
I just want to interject that this topic brings up the whole thing of the kind of atelier of old, in the Renaissance. There were schools of art and teams. And, when I started, I was painting, but I was also one of the earliest to do a website. I did early HTML. And to Cynthia's point, like you can't do everything. So now I work with a young coder who, when I talk about these interactive pieces about 9/11, he goes, "Oh, Roz, I was only 10 years old, when 9/11 happened," or, but it's, we work online. I've never even met this coder, and I have a little team when I work on my diamondscapes. It's a narrator, someone I've worked with since I worked at the World Trade Center 20 years ago, and this young coder, and we get together, and I do believe this is building. You're still the artist with the ideas, but one of the things I love about digital is it kind of brings back that whole working together, like Techspressionism. We're learning from each other all the time. And it's just a fascinating place to be in this changing world. And, you really read about it in Arts and Leisure in the New York Times. It's, but that's one of the things of being ahead. You always have to give things up if you're going to be a leader in something that's new.
And
this is
that
still considered new, even though it's pervasive now. It is pervasive, but we're talking a different language, and I think most of the people are just using it like you would a spoon in the kitchen. Whatever.
And also the thing that I like that inspired me early on were the salons where there's sort of a critique aspect or people giving feedback on the work. That was something that I really didn't have access to after graduate school. That is, I like that in graduate school there were these structured crits or critiques where people, at least in my experience, who were not at all working with computers, glass blowers and sculptors, would see my work and give me feedback that had nothing to do with the technical nature of how the work was created. It was really about the ideas and some of the, the formalist aesthetics of the work. And after that, I think artists become very sort of siloed. They can, where they're interested in their work. They might see other work in gallery spaces, but there's not a whole lot of opportunity for groups of artists to get together and share each other's work and talk about it, which I think is something that's, really special about the Techspressionist community.
Yeah, and that's actually what we do. We have a group that's a Techspressionist group, which you're welcome to join. It is at 10 o'clock at night for you, and it would go until 1 o'clock in the morning. So it's
drink a lot of coffee.
So it's very late. But we also, unfortunately, there is no Zoom simultaneous translation into Uzbek, but there is into Russian. And so we have the ability to turn on captions in Russian or any language that Zoom happens to have. And so if you want to stay up late one night, people in Uzbekistan, we meet and then go around in the group and say what we plan to do. And then we give everybody an hour to organize what they're going to present or to get some work together. So we actually really start the talking at what would be about 11:15 at night for you. So very late, but we do have people from India, for example, who join in, and then we try to have them go first so they can sign off after a while and get to sleep. So it'd be wonderful if you're interested in joining that.
We
You
also
can,
record them. So, like, if you want to look back or, at techspressionism.com/salon, there's an archive of all the recordings. So you can go back and you could actually look through also all the different past topics. So there's a bunch of different ones on AI. There's some that specifically focus on photography or sculpture. So there's a big archive of all of the salons, over 100 of them online. So that's something where you can view it at any point. You don't have to stay up late for that. And we actually have one coming up today, a live salon that's all artists from France that Cynthia Rubin actually helped organize and brought in some of her colleagues and friends. So I think that's, the international nature of the group is something that's really special. And the ability to be involved with artists and the museum in Uzbekistan, I think, is just amazing. It's something that I never would have anticipated. And everybody in the group brings their set of colleagues and contacts, to the experience.
I want to add something to what Cynthia said. I mean, the co-working group, one of its tremendous advantages is that the broad expertise that each person brings in terms of software and approach is extremely helpful in stimulating your imagination about where to go. I almost always find a new way to think about things from that. And even though I'm using only my own software, it doesn't matter. It's still the ability to think about, how to manipulate images and things like that they bring because of all the different kinds of software they use. I mean, I also participate in critiques with some of the cooperatives I'm a member of with manual artists. And that's useful and interesting. But for people like us, the co-working group is a very powerful way to advance your own imagination.
okay.
I see we have a question from the Makerspace. You're muted, I think.
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry if it's out of topic. I guess it might be out of topic, but can Minecraft be considered as part of art?
Oh.
Because we have a lot of guys who are really into Minecraft. They're creating their own worlds in both like creative modes and survival. That's the reason I'm asking. And I'm myself a big fan of Minecraft. I have my own world there.
I can respond to that. So I have an 11-year-old daughter, and she loves Minecraft, and she's created these worlds that, when she's showing me these things that she creates, it is just amazing to me. She creates even like little animals and has names for them, and they walk around, and the spaces are completely interactive. And she actually made a little studio for me in her world. So she takes me into the studio and says she put a hot tub in it, which I like.
Of course.
And so, but I think,
Did she give you hair in that world?
well, I don't have an avatar in it, but she probably, I don't know if she would, honestly. She likes to
Minecraft
make
hair
fun
would be
of
interesting.
her bald dad, but I don't think that she considers it art. But I think for me, I mean, I look at it as complete, creativity. I mean, it's really amazing, and I think even people who are budding architects, like, I mean, she's 11, but I see what young people are able to create, and the fact that also there's a whole culture built around Minecraft with its own music and creators for music in the game. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
You
I mean,
know,
I've had a lot of students in the past who used Minecraft to build their own worlds as solutions to some of the problems that I gave them, assignments that I gave them. So yeah, I mean, there have been museum exhibitions of game art, so you know, there's precedent. Yeah, for sure.
we will be talking about some of similar approaches in the session in 2 weeks on May 21st.
Oh
But
yes,
it just occurred to me, if a lot of people in Uzbekistan are using Minecraft, I think it would be interesting to somehow schedule a time when you could show us what you're doing.
Absolutely.
I would
that would be
love to see
amazing.
that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think that's possible, Rams?
I think so, yeah. We could
I-
ask our visitors, volunteers to bring their like devices with Minecraft worlds.
That would be fabulous. I'd love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, it'd be really great to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, any chance you could do it late at night? No, you have to do it at this hour, right? Okay.
Well, don't they stay
Are
up
you
all
able
night?
to access your worlds through a computer or only on like mobile devices?
Some guys access their worlds through computers.
Mhm.
I myself, my iPod.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yep.
Because if it can be viewed on a computer, then you could share your screen on Zoom and actually, people viewing could see it much more, in much more detailed way, if it's on the computer screen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Um,
and see
Can we
process and interact. Yeah,
yeah. But if
can
you
we
could,
do that next session? Sorry. So,
go ahead. Go ahead.
can we do that next session, like showcasing the worlds?
um, in the next session, May 21st, um,
Hmm.
maybe,
Maybe for the last one.
yeah, for the last one, maybe you could record some of it in advance if it doesn't work, also in real time, and then we could show the recording. Let's see. We have a little flexibility there, so we have to figure it out. But that might work. Or we could do a special session where
Mhm.
you do that. Um, and one of the things that I'm just brainstorming here is if they can record in advance or meet in the makerspace and record, maybe we could show that sometime at a regular salon and people would be
Yeah.
at home and it would be 10 o'clock at night, but you could sign in to talk about it from home
Mhm.
at 10 o'clock if we had a recording of it that you
I
did
think
early.
that really dovetail into the world building um, session. Even if it was a separate recording, that could be edited in at the end or something like that. Because I think it's very relevant. And we did actually have an initiative with Techspressionism, not with Minecraft, but using a virtual environment called Mozilla Hubs, which was an open source platform. And one of our artists created a whole virtual world where all the different artists participating had virtual studio spaces. And I'm not going to make any official announcements yet, but it looks like we might be coming up with a new sort of way to have a virtual environment, associated with the community.
That'd be
So
nice.
yeah, it looks like that's happening with another group called Loop Art Critique, and I met with one of the artists that's involved in that recently. So I think we're going to have a collaborative project together where we can have a shared space, and you guys would certainly be welcome, to come and join in, and it would be a place where artists could get together in virtual space in real time.
Right?
Yeah, getting back to co-working for a moment, I just wanted to make sure that the creatives in Makerspace are aware of the fact that when you come to co-working, you're not required to show any kind of finished piece necessarily. It may be something that you're working on that you'd like to share with us. So we don't want you to think that you have to come to it and have a finished work. Because we're all about sharing with one another feedback about whatever you're working on. So keep that in mind. Don't be intimidated by the thought of coming to co-working. Cynthia and I have always encouraged that to be the case.
It would also be
these-
kind of
these are-
cool, like as part of this series, to have a session. Maybe it wouldn't need to be so structured, but to have, people in the makerspace, it focus on what you guys are doing there, and you could share a little bit about whatever projects you guys have created and the facilities. I think that'd be really interesting, actually, because we'd get an idea about what's happening, in your space, but also like what creative people are doing. Like, I think the idea of what you're making in Minecraft, I mean, maybe that could even be incorporated into something like that, where something like that sort of a session could sort of be a bookend to this series of presentations. And it wouldn't need to be like really scripted or structured so much as, giving you guys in the makerspace an opportunity to share your work. And I'm sure a lot of people in the community would really be interested in what a makerspace is and what sort of facilities are. We do have them in the US. I've never actually been in a makerspace or used a makerspace, but I wish there was one that was around where I live, honestly, but there isn't.
Hmm. Well, at the college that I've been teaching at, we had the second fab lab in the world, next to MIT.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Can't think, what's the guy's name at MIT who did the fab? I can't think of his name, but he came to Lorain County Community College to give a talk about fab labs, and this was after he'd created the first one. And like an 8-year-old in the crowd raised their hand and said, "Can we have one here?" And Neil Gershenfeld, and he said yes. So they built it. So we still have a fab lab we've had for over 20 years. It's a really cool place. So maybe we could work out a collaboration there as well.
Yeah, that's great. We actually have 2 maker spaces in New Haven, but
Cool.
I haven't been able to use them, but I will now. I'm inspired with the laser.
The laser is really great. I mean, it's really very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to do some stuff with a laser etcher in grad school. I don't know if you remember, Greg, but I went to the Home Depot and I got these marble tiles for bathroom
yes.
floors, and I
Yeah.
put them in the laser etcher. No
Yeah,
one was
those-
around at the time, and it was really only supposed to be for the graduate, I think, architecture and engineering students, but they let the graduate art students go in there. So, I got pieces of plywood, marble panels, and
Yeah.
I didn't break anything.
Those were those 12 by 12 pieces of more. I remember that.
That's right.
Yeah. Very cool. The artists are always in these places late at night. That's when they give us access to stuff, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's true.
Even working
So-
at corporations in the early days, I took a different path. I worked down at the World Trade Center and started some of the first new media departments. And I had incredible equipment. I
I'm
mean,
sure.
Avid, incredible equipment that I would work with. And it inspired a lot of my work, which was all about commerce and business and kind of poking fun of all of it.
Yeah.
So, there are many avenues for creating work.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking
Okay.
of maker spaces, Providence has a community of libraries that are maker spaces, and we have AS 220 that was begun by Umberto Krenka that has been a tremendous maker space for Rhode Island.
Cool.
That's great. So we're getting up to overtime here.
A little bit over time, but it's been a good conversation, I think.
Yes.
Very good.
So, well, are we done?
Guess so.
Well, I have to sign off because I have to get ready for my next Zoom. So,
yes.
because we actually have a salon in less than 2 hours with artists from France. And if you're at home and you want to join in, you can join in. So,
All right.
okay.
Terrific. Well, see you in a couple hours, I hope. As long as I don't
hope
fall
so.
asleep.
Yeah.
All
Okay,
right.
great.
Bye-bye.